welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's me, Jacquie Menser, family lawyer at Bennett Griffin, and I'm joined today by my colleague Sarah Pennicott.
Hello.
Hello, Sarah. And also we've got a special guest. We've got Gill Lynes from Carpenter Box Accountants. Hello, Gill.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us today. What we're doing today is launching a new series of our vlogs where we're covering various issues which relate to our family clients, but wider issues as well. And in that respect, we've noticed that there's a growing need for advice in terms of later life provision. There's been an increase in clients who are contacting us who, and when I say later life, and I can say this personally, we're talking sort of 50 plus, 60 plus, as it is now, in terms of getting together in relationships, but also sadly at the other end when there's a breakdown. Now, I know you, Gill, you have a lot of involvement with clients on your side, on the financial and accountancy side, in terms of life planning and financial planning, and really that input in terms of their needs as people get older. And I can see from your amazing biography and profile that you've got over 30 years of experience.
Yeah, I know, it's really hard to believe, isn't it? But sadly true, yes. Yeah.
It's quite amazing. And you've got various qualifications and accreditations, including SOLA. I wonder if you can explain what that is for us, please.
Yeah, so I'm a member of the Society of Later Life Advisors, and really we advocate for higher standards of financial advice for those in later life, because we believe that there's a potential for those clients to be particularly vulnerable, and most of us coming up in later life inevitably will be having some pretty significant life events coming up, not just for us but maybe for our families as well, and we believe that those clients need a greater degree of care and just looking after, really.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. It's a growing area, isn't it?
It is, yes.
You know, we're growing as an older age population, so it's something that everybody needs to think about in some shape or form. And I'm guessing very much like my area of work and Sarah's area of work, you're having to talk with people about difficult issues, sensitive issues, in terms of planning. So it's the sort of the old adage of, you know, you fail to plan, you plan to fail, but also being kind to people and appreciating that it's not always easy with family issues.
Exactly, and I think, you know, it can be really difficult. I'm also I'm on the panel of CareWise, which is West Sussex local authorities real drive to try and get people to understand more about how to pay for care and care fees funding. So there's 6 of us on that panel. We're all independent financial advisors, and really most of the work that I do is signposting people to information which is readily available, but you know, people are scared, I think, to start looking. They don't know where to find advice and they don't know what to trust. So you know, it's a really good way of making sure that people have some free access to good quality advice. So you know, we don't make a charge for our initial calls at all, and mostly people are simply being signposted to, you know, what they need to do. But you are correct, it is a growing area.
Yes, and I hadn't appreciated, so we're an aging population because we're living longer, but also because there was a baby boom after the war.
Yes.
Baby boomers.
Yes. But I think that's really valuable in terms of signposting people, and that's what we've been trying to do through these vlogs, so that people know what their rights are, what they're getting into, and make decisions with a proper understanding of what the implications of those are. So the areas we're looking at today fall into 2 broad categories: that things that people should consider when they form a relationship later in life, because quite often people are coming from previous relationships, they've already got children, they want to protect their assets that they have at that time, but also make sure that their spouses are provided for in the event of their death. And that's something that you're able to help with, isn't it, at the start of the relationship, as well as the documents we can prepare, but giving people financial advice about how to protect those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, when you come together, it's really a question of who owns what and what your family dynamic is. So you know, some of you might have, both parties might have children, they might be grown-up children, teenage children. You know, it is a question of who pays for what and who's bringing what to the relationship. So you know, you might have a relationship where, you know, you're not equally wealthy, you don't have equal amounts of assets, so you don't have equal amounts of earnings, and in those circumstances, who will pay for what and who will own what? I think, you know, that's where you guys are really, really valuable, at, you know, making sure that everybody understands and is fully cognizant of you know, the arrangements. And I think that's where, you know, you're really valuable for that.
Yes, yeah, and we've talked before, Jackie, about the importance of having those conversations early on in the relationship, because whilst they might be difficult, at least everybody knows what you expect to get from that and what you expect from the other person. Whereas having the elephant in the room as the relationship goes on, it's only going to be all the more difficult to have those conversations.
Absolutely. I think it's about not making assumptions as well, because where you've got you've got couples who've got second or third families, and they're trying to blend those families with adult children. You've got all sorts of competing demands. I mean, not least in terms of, as you say, Jill, thinking about the couple's actual financial planning and what they're getting into in terms of who's paying for what, but also what are their commitments to their children. Often they're adult children or their grandchildren, so it could be a fact that they're lending money. You know, there are loans, there are gifts, there are various things going out left, right and centre to extended family, immediate family. Has that been documented? Is it forming some sort of you know, loan or debt arrangement with their new partner as well, or not, or new spouse? All those sorts of things. I mean, we see it from the start through to the end, as well as you do, no doubt. But where, for instance, more so now, we've got mums and dads, you know, grandparents who are lending money to children, and there isn't any security for it. There's no collateral, there's no registration of a charge on the property or anything like that. So all sorts of things arise, don't they? And when someone's getting into a new relationship, they could be bringing that with them and may not think to speak to their new partner or husband or spouse about that.
Yeah, it's this whole question of, you know, is it a loan or is it a gift? Sometimes quite thorny, isn't it? And then you know, you mentioned giving gifts to children and grandchildren. It's pretty common, isn't it, for people to want to do that, so get people onto the property ladder. But what happens then if, you know, you need to go into care and at a later point you've run out of money and need to ask the local authority for assistance? How is that gift going to be, or loan, going to be looked upon? It's it's, you know, it's important to really think about these things, isn't it?
It is. It's important to have those discussions, and also to get as much as possible down as documentation and recorded, because what we're looking at also is avoiding the contested probate situation, avoiding any litigation. I mean, you know, Sarah, we've got an expanding contested probate department now, haven't we?
Yes.
Which is for a good reason. And especially with the economic climate that we've got at the moment, which, you know, will no doubt continue, sadly, people are looking for financial assistance and gain in all different directions.
Yes,
you know, be it valid or otherwise. So it's even more important than ever to make sure you have a clear understanding with your partner as to exactly who's going to get what at the end of the day.
And that's recorded, because there was an article recently that showed with the falling number of marriages, there's an increase in the number of contested probate applications, because people aren't always thinking about formalising what they want to happen in a will. They may not have married, and they stay living together, and they sort of assume, well, it's something to put off for another day. But you never know when it's going to happen, and it is something that needs to be considered at the outset of any relationship, not just those where there is a family from a previous relationship. And equally LPAs, lasting powers of attorneys, really important to get in place whatever your age, because you don't know what's around the corner, to make sure that that things are in place if you lose your capacity.
There's still so much misunderstanding, isn't there, with LPAs? You know, I've had, if I had £1 for every time somebody conflates appointing an executor in their will and assuming that that will then be, you know, the same people on their LPA, and they think they've done it. And you know, it's a real huge misunderstanding.
Yeah,
I feel.
Yeah,
and somewhere that another thing that people just need to get advice about, even if it is an initial appointment, to make sure that they fully understand what they're doing, and achieving what they actually want to achieve, not what they think they're achieving.
yes.
And also, I think realising responsibilities. I mean, I've spoken to 2 people this week via the CareWise website who agreed to the attorneys, and both of them said that if they'd known what it entailed, they would not have agreed.
No.
But a sense of duty is, you know, carrying them through, and they want to do the best for their loved one. But had they realised, they wouldn't have agreed to it.
No.
Because it is a responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in moving on to sort of where couples do get married, I think from our point of view, Jackie, particularly where there are second relationships, it is then equally important. So you've got your will, you've got your LPA, but to put in place some sort of prenuptial, postnuptial agreement. So even if you have married and you're suddenly thinking, oh, I need to formalise this, it's not too late. You can do it after the marriage, and it will still carry some weight in the event of a divorce. But if you're looking to protect the interests of third parties like children from previous relationships, then that's the best way to do it. And again, getting advice before you get married is the best thing that you can do.
Absolutely, and it can cover as much as you want it to cover as well with the agreements. You know, there's nothing that can't be put in that agreement. So it could be from the, you know, from the general, and the, you know, the big stuff like who's owning what and how are you owning it. So are you owning it jointly? Are you owning it as tenants in common? So you get into the sort of technical property side, but it's really important in terms of you know, survivorship and who's getting what at the end of the day. And then you can also go into the minutiae in terms of, you know, who's paying for these particular bills, how would we distribute any gifts that we've received from relatives or wedding presents, etc. That sort of thing. So it's really it's a great coverall, but it means you've got a document that then you can put in a drawer and forget about for the time being, in the hope that you don't need to rely upon it at any point in the future. But yeah, that's where we come in really, is to help and guide on that. And obviously we know what the law says if things do go wrong.
Yes.
But it's trying to put down that foundation in the hope that everything will be well.
Yes, yeah. And I think, I mean, I think some people fail to appreciate, they often think prenuptial, postnuptial agreements are they're not expensive to prepare, but people don't want to spend the cost at that time. But actually the amount that you will save in terms of legal costs, stress, and protecting your assets by recording what you want at that point, it's money worth spending, and it's advice worth getting.
And do you think it probably reassures the wider family as well when people are getting together, if obviously they've shared the fact that they're doing this, would probably reassure children, you know, from the first marriages? So
yes,
if everyone concerned thinks, oh wow, you know, they're really thinking about it, you know, they put something formal in place, it's probably quite reassuring, I would have thought.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jill, because also sometimes it's the case that you know, children from previous relationships or marriages will no doubt be very protective of their parents entering into a new relationship or marriage, especially maybe in later life. No, that's a very good point. So it could add as security and confidence for everyone. The other point also, Sarah, of course, is pension nominations.
Yes.
So again, in terms of future provision and security, and again, no presumption should be made. You know, there needs to be something clear and defined.
Absolutely, because although it's within the pension trustees' gift, if you like, to make those decisions if nothing's in place, it's far better and simpler if people keep their nominations of beneficiaries up to date. These days with defined contribution pensions, you can nominate anybody. You can nominate the Cats Home, a political party. You can nominate into trusts. So if you set up a trust for the benefit of grandchildren, children.
3 days later.
Okay, so we've been talking about all the positives so far in terms of planning, recording things, having those conversations to make sure as much as possible that things are clear and agreed. But obviously, sadly, in terms of the work that we do, Gill, and also yourself to a great extent, we're also talking about the other end, when things do break down, unfortunately, and what we can do to help our clients in terms of those situations. Now, obviously, a lot of it is about the planning that happened before that, and then hopefully there'll be less to do at the other end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you've prepared properly and you've got a really good idea of who owns what and what you want to do with those assets, then it should certainly be easy if you do come to a parting of the ways. But I think, you know, it's probably those things that perhaps you forget about. So things like nomination of pensions, again, a lot of people, you know, if they've had these arrangements for many years, may forget to do that. Nominations, if you've got any protection policies, so any whole of life cover, what do you want to happen with those? Things like investment bonds, things like, so any inheritance tax mitigation that you put into place, any trust planning that you've done, do you still want, you know, the same people that you had nominated to be a trustee, do you want that to continue? So I think it's a real overhaul of all of the arrangements that you have in place, just to make sure that they're still relevant and they're still appropriate going forward in your new circumstances.
Yes, and with that, obviously, updating wills is again something that's really easy to overlook, and your lasting powers of attorney, because you're probably appointed your spouse previously to look after you, but you're not going to want that to happen going forwards, are you? And unless you amend it, you're going to be in a very difficult situation.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And also about guardians for children, if there are any dependent children still, those sorts of issues need to be looked at afresh, don't they? So yes. It's really revising and reviewing all the time as a sort of work in progress.
Yeah,
yes.
a lot of life admin as well, and just, you know, because there's all sorts of reasons why relationships break up, and when you start talking about money, it's a sensitive subject, but it is, you know, to protect yourself, you should make sure that you have a look at your credit record and just call for a report from a provider such as Experian, for example, and make sure that there's nothing on there untoward. And you then can disassociate yourself, if you like, from the other party, just to make sure that nothing happens going forward. So it's just about protecting yourself and making sure that everything's as you thought it was and as it should be. No nasty surprises.
No.
No. And for those people who haven't had that planning at the outset, it is obviously more complicated. The court will always look at the individual circumstances of the party, but one of those circumstances would be if they have prenup and they've put things in place. But for those who haven't, obviously the starting one, obviously the starting point is an equal division, but it can be a lot more complicated when people are older, can't it? Because they have different needs, and one person might have significantly greater care needs going forwards. And I know that's something you have experience with the care needs, Gill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, there's all sorts of things that could be in place that might need to be unravelled. And I think with all of these things, you know, we try to encourage people to involve their whole family, so that, again, you know, there's no nasty surprises. But, you know, you really need to think, if one party was to need care, you know, what's happened about that? Have you purchased an annuity? And does that purchase need to be factored into the overall wealth? Because after all, that's a guaranteed source of income for the rest of that individual's life. You know, what happens about that? So these things need to be thought about, definitely.
Yes, yeah, and that calls for, it's a lot more complicated than in typically younger parties where they don't have those care needs, that actually your advice and that financial advice about the options to meet their care needs is essential, isn't it? So whether they have equity release schemes, or whether, like you say, an annuity, or are they going to put it into savings and pay out of those savings? But there are so many options for them to consider and to really understand.
Yeah, there are, and I think, you know, in some cases with a divorce, there's a lot, it's very emotional, and people do have a sentimental attachment to things like, for example, the family home. So you know, without perhaps considering whether or not it's a sustainable solution to remain in that property. If we're talking about, you know, a drop in your income, in your regular income, as a result of having elected to remain in that family home, how sustainable is that, and how realistic is it? And I think that people do really need to try, and I know it's so hard to try and take sentiment out of it, but to realistically look at what the likelihood of the upkeep of that property would be, and, you know, continuing to pay the bills, you know, how realistic and sustainable is it? So, you know, I think that's something, you know, it's really hard, I know, but it's something that needs to be thought of.
Yeah, and the practical arrangements of the property, because some people want to stay in a house because it's been their family home, but actually staying in a large property with stairs as you get older probably isn't going to be the right answer, is it?
No, exactly. And, you know, to put it another way, are you simply saying that you're going to be kicking that can down the road and moving again in a few years' time? So I think it's about future proofing. If you're parting ways later in life, how much upheaval do you want on a regular basis? Would it be better to, you know, downsize whilst you can and make that move then? But, you know, these are all things that it's very emotional, an emotional time anyway, but, you know, you could be saving yourself a lot of heartache, I think.
Yeah, and hopefully if you've had those open conversations, as difficult as they may be, at the outset, especially in terms of wills and lasting powers of attorney, then some of that will have already been put in motion, just to be activated when, you know, that time does come, in fact. So it's not as difficult. We spoke earlier also about contested probate situations. Again, we're trying to avoid people having to go through that trauma and upset, and their relatives having to deal with that. So it's putting as much in place as a blueprint as possible, isn't it?
Yeah. At least you sort of got a roadmap out, if you like.
And then you've got the emotion on top, which is unavoidable, but hopefully it would ease that.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So I think the take-home message is to get advice all the way through, isn't it? Whether it's at the outset of the relationship, from your point of view, Jill, probably as the relationship's ongoing, you can help couples in terms of their financial arrangements, but then knowing what their rights are to put things in place so that it makes the breakdown of any relationship, should it happen, easier.
Yeah, absolutely, and trying to avoid any of those unintended consequences of making a decision which, you know, might be based more on sentiment than on practicality, and just making sure that you've got a clear record of who owns what and where it is and what you want to do with it. I think I think people get themselves in a bit of a pickle sometimes as well with you know, best intentions of ambitions to perhaps guard against things like inheritance tax by wanting to make gifts, where there's a breakdown in a relationship. You know, I think people might make a rash decision in some cases to give away money with the best will in the world when they can't perhaps afford to. And I do see quite a lot of this. The desire to mitigate tax needs to be offset with the fact that, you know, you want to have a nice time and live comfortably in your retirement yourself. Likewise with the will and desire to try and avoid paying care fees where possible. Again, you know, and I think that this is something that people need to think about as well when they're, you know, perhaps sorting things out after a major life upheaval. The idea of giving lots of money away when you might need it for your own care and comfort in later life, something that needs to be thought really long and hard about, I think.
Yes,
indeed. Well, thank you, Jill. You I mean, in terms of your technical skill, completely out there, fantastic, but also in terms of the practical common sense side to it as well, which I think is you know, what we're about, hopefully, as well, Sarah, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Obviously, we've got the legal knowledge and we're there to guide our clients, but we're also trying to support and really just look at things in a very clear way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, you know, there's all sorts of reasons that people end a relationship, but I think, you know, especially in later life when, you know, you might feel that you haven't got those decades of time to start again afresh and anew. You just want to make sure that you know you've got enough funds there where possible to enjoy yourself, you know, and to know that you've managed everything as well as you possibly can. Yes. And that's on a lot of people's minds, isn't it, to make sure that they don't leave a mess for
that is very
people
true.
remaining behind.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where we come in to help them.
Yeah, completely. I think if you've taken proper professional advice from a legal professional, at least you know you've got the comfort of knowing that your family won't be left with a big mess to sort out when you've gone, and that's, I know it's on a lot of people's minds.
Yes,
it is. It is. Well, hopefully with a combined effort, Jill, we can get people to the place where they need to be and think about enjoying life.
Yeah, I think so. You know, there's bumps in the road, isn't there, always? But
always.
It's how you get over them, get over the heavy ground as light as possible.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us, Jill, and we'll be back with another video in due course. But thank you for your insight, and have a lovely day.
Yes, and you. Take care.
You too. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Bye.